Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. We live on a continent that still talks like an empire and behaves like a province. Brussels speaks about strategic autonomy, values-based leadership, European unity. Yet in practice, it behaves like a larger version of Ukraine, waiting for a call from Washington, living on borrowed money, picking fights with neighbors, and then acting surprised when the economy cracks, demographics collapse, and global respect evaporates. The bill for this theater does not arrive in Davos or on Mars. It lands in your taxes, your utility bills, and in the future, your children will inherit. There is one simple number that everyone here tries to hide from. On paper, we have almost 200 countries with flags and nameplates. In reality, there are fewer than 10 power centers that genuinely decide war, peace, and trade rules. Europe loves to present itself as one of these great players. But if you look honestly at how decisions are made, Europe increasingly looks less like a center of power and more like a client. And this is where the official story falls apart. Let's start with physics and money, not ideology. The European economy rested on three pillars: relatively cheap nearby energy, predictable rules of the game, and access to huge external markets. Everything else, including values, was built on top of pipelines, power lines, ports, and factories. When you damage the base infrastructure, no amount of PR can repair it. Look at the map. A significant share of the oil that Europe now proudly says it imports not from Russia actually comes from Kazakhstan through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. That's a single main route through the Black Sea, carrying the bulk of Kazakh exports. Any disruption along that corridor hits not Moscow first, but European refineries. All the talk about alternative routes sounds good in patriotic telegram channels, but in real logistics, it means extra transshipments, longer routes, and higher costs. In short, the math doesn't care about ambition. When some minister in Brussels says, "We'll just find other routes," that is the mental level of a school kid drawing a new corridor across mountains and seas in a notebook and calling it strategy. Real economic geography is brutal. Every extra leg, every transshipment, every intermediary turns sanctions as a weapon into an additional tax on your fuel and heating bills. Europe carefully pretends logistics are a minor detail that can be shouted down with the right tweet about solidarity with Kyiv. That's not policy, that's refusal to think. While some people draw corridors, others quietly build infrastructure. Hungary and Slovakia do not write three-volume manifestos about values. They negotiate oil, gas, nuclear power, and factories. German carmakers are shutting plants at home and opening them in so-called peripheral Eastern Europe. Hungary gets new production, long-term contracts, and a clear energy backbone. Germany gets speeches about a green transition, rising public debt, and tens of thousands of industrial jobs gone for good. Here's the part economists fear. The structure changes, but the rhetoric doesn't. In reports, Europe still paints itself as a center. In reality, the center of production and cheap energy is shifting to places where people can still add and subtract without a panic attack. Now to the players and incentives. Formally, we have the collective West, the US, Europe, and allies. In practice, these are different floors of the same half-collapsing building. Washington pursues its own agenda. Hold on to top dog status, control capital and tech flows, avoid direct war with other nuclear powers. Europe does not pursue its own agenda. Europe is busy implementing the needs of American domestic politics while also serving its own elites, who have long lived in a PR universe, not in the world of production and infrastructure. It is symbolic that serious talks on war and peace do not run through official European institutions, but through strange combinations of senators, advisors, business partners, and informal channels. People who until yesterday were seen as marginal figures or just relatives of leaders suddenly become the real communication links between capitals. This is a classic imperial pattern. There are formal structures for public consumption, and then there are shadow bridges where real messages travel. So what is the European Commission doing during all this? Public rhetoric is solidarity. Private briefings are market share. In public, Brussels functionaries declare that Europe has never been more united. Behind closed doors, the same countries negotiate. Who gets which energy assets, which refinery will receive new oil flows, and who will be first in line for Russian, Kazakh, or Serbian assets under the noble label of reparations. This is where Ukrainization of Europe begins. On paper, you still see sovereign states, parliaments, elections, debates. In practice, you see external supervisors, dependence on credit, budgets stuffed with military spending and social patches, and a political class that at best plays the role of press secretary. Nothing without Washington, nothing against Washington, combined with deep resentment at being treated as expendable. The old Ukrainian line, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, has mutated into a European version, nothing about Europe without clearing it with overseas shareholders. So, let's take a breath. Where are we now? We have a continent where its largest economy lives on borrowing measured in trillions and openly says, we will never repay this debt, we will service it. Strip away the technocratic vocabulary, and it means something simple. Today's elites are buying themselves political time on credit, and the people who will be paying it back are those currently in school and university. They will not be paying it back out of some new economic miracle, but out of stagnation, factory closures, more expensive services, and an aging population. Here's the number nobody likes to mention: the ratio of workers to pensioners. In most European countries, by the 2030s to 2040s, roughly every third person will be retired or just about to be. The young are few in number, already indebted, and are now being quietly prepared for the trenches, under slogans that do not belong to them emotionally. The older generation built a world where house, car, stable job was a basic package. The younger generation got rent, mortgages, subscriptions, precarious work, and the prospect of fighting for someone else's failed bets. Let's zoom out for a second. Combine an aging society, a debt pyramid, and a political class still acting out imperial fantasies, and you get exactly what we see: radicalization at the edges, an empty center, and a widespread feeling that someone at the top has completely lost it. In Germany, some parties are declared an enemy of democracy, isolated, harassed, and blocked, while real street radicals who attack people with pipes and hammers receive political visits and moral support from respectable MPs. In such a system, people quickly conclude that the law is decoration and real legitimacy sits somewhere else. From here, all options are bad. The only question is who pays first. On top of this, the European Commission and several Eastern European governments have convinced themselves there is an elegant way out of the debt corner: seize Russian assets. The problem is simple. Those assets do not belong to an abstract villain, but to the central bank of another state that has not lost a war and has not signed any act of surrender. Under any normal legal tradition, that is, politely, a serious problem, and bluntly, theft. Here comes the explaining to the very slow part. If you legalize confiscating the reserves of someone else's central bank, you open the door for your own money to be grabbed when the balance of power shifts. If you cannot write this into existing Roman law-based frameworks without blowing up the whole system, you start inventing workaround schemes. Freeze only the interest, use the profits, transfer the income, not the principal. That is not strategy. That is an attempt to delay the moment when someone knocks and asks, "Where is the money you are legally obliged to return?" This is the flaw you can't fix with PR. At the same time, Europe gets another bonus: a political class whose professional level increasingly resembles a traveling circus. Foreign ministers talking about hybrid strikes, major cyber operations against Russia, as if a tiny Baltic state will now rewire the internet. Officials throwing out numbers about hundreds of thousands of kidnapped children or millions of dead Russian soldiers that collapse under the first serious check. People responsible for war and peace operate with data on the level of drunk kitchen gossip and still see themselves as moral giants. Here's the part economists fear. When control of a complex system passes to people whose only instruments are PR and hysteria, the system first lies to itself and then starts to fall apart. Add Demonovi, where debt is high and the future is opaque, birth rates fall. That's not a conspiracy. That's mechanics. A young couple living in a rented flat, paying interest, working in an economy where a new green experiment can wipe out their factory or sector overnight, will think a long time before having a second child, and often the first. Meanwhile, in regions where debt is low or where Islamic law heavily restricts forms of usury, fertility rates remain higher. You see the problem here, right? Europe wants to live like a rich pensioner, fight like an empire, borrow like a startup, and reproduce like a traditional society. Physics does not allow that combination. In this context, talk of European leadership, the EU's values role, and the western part of Eurasia sounds like a bad joke. The US, Russia, China, India, and a number of Islamic states are centers with their own civilizational codes, production volumes, armies, and levels of political will. Europe, by contrast, is turning into a club of failed imperial heirs, issuing grand statements without the energy base, demographic depth, or intellectual quality of elite to match their rhetoric. So what does this mean for an ordinary European? More taxes, fewer stable industrial jobs, more green surcharges, fewer real trains that run on time, more speeches about fighting populism, less actual work on inflation and housing costs, more hysteria about threats to democracy, fewer honest explanations why your children must pay the bill for overdue geopolitical fantasies. I don't believe in a pretty exit from this structure through one peace plan, one summit, or one change of names in the European Commission. To turn this system around, three things are needed. Recognition that Europe is no longer the center, but one pole among several. A clear break with the Ukrainian model of everyone will decide for us. Our job is to scream loudly. And a return to adult politics, where you count first and announce later. Right now, none of those conditions exist. What we see instead is the accelerated provincialization of a continent that still thinks it is the judge of history. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and try to remember, slogans don't power grids, systems do.